equals immoral violence. Almost everyone agrees that sometimes physical force is justified and sometimes it is not. Though there is a large, debatable gray area, it is generally accepted that aggressive force, the initiation of violence against another person, is unjustified and immoral. This would include theft, assault, and murder, as well as more indirect forms of aggression such as vandalism and fraud. On the other hand, using force in defense of the innocent is widely accepted as justified and moral, even noble. The legitimacy of such force is determined by the situation it is used in, not by who is using it. To simplify, the types of force which anyone has the right to use can be termed good force, and any acts of force which normal people do not have the right to commit can be termed bad force. The reader can apply his own standards, and the logic here will still apply. However, agents of authority are imagined to have the right to use force not only in the situations where anyone would have such right, but in other situations as well. It stands to reason that if everyone has the right to use inherently justified good force, and the law authorizes agents of government to use force in other situations as well, then the law is attempting to legitimize bad force. In short, authority is permission to commit evil, to do things that would be recognized as immoral and unjustified if anyone else did them. Obviously, neither the enthusiastic voter who proudly posts a campaign sign in his yard, nor the well intended citizen who runs for office understands this fact. If they did, they would understand that democracy is nothing more than majority approved immoral violence and cannot possibly fix society or be a good tool for freedom or justice. Despite the mythology which claims that a person's vote is his voice and the right to vote is what makes people free, the truth is that all democracy does is legitimize aggression and unjustified violence. The logic of this is so simple and obvious that an enormous amount of propaganda is needed in order to train people not to see it. If everyone has the right to use inherently righteous force and government agents are allowed to use force in other situations as well, then by its very nature, what government adds to society is immoral violence. The problem is that the people are taught that when violence has been made legal and is committed by authority, it changes from immoral violence to righteous law enforcement. The fundamental premise upon which all governments rest is the idea that would be morally wrong for the average person to do can be morally right when done by agents of authority, implying that the standards of moral behavior which apply to human beings does not apply to agents of government. Again, hinting that thing being called government is superhuman. Inherently righteous force, which most people generally agree is limited to defensive force, does not require any law or special authority to make it valid. The only thing that law and government are needed for is to attempt to legitimize immoral force, and that is exactly what government adds, and the only thing it adds to society more inherently unjust violence. No one who understands this simple truth will ever claim that government is essential to human civilization. The notion that man made law can negate the usual rules of civilized behavior has been has some fairly terrifying ramifications. If government is not limited by basic human morality, which the very concept of authority implies, by what standards or principles would government action be limited at all? If 30% taxation is valid, why not 100% taxation be valid? If legal theft is legitimate and just, why couldn't legalized torture and murder be legitimate and just? If some collective need requires society to have an institution that has an exemption from morality, why would there be any limits on what it can do? If exterminating an entire race or outlawing a religion, or forcibly enslaving millions is deemed necessary for the common good, by what moral standards could anyone complain once they have accepted the premise of authority? All belief in government rests on the idea that the common good justifies the legal initiation of violence against innocents to one degree or another. And once that premise has been accepted, there is no objective moral standard or limit government behavior. History shows this all too clearly. Almost everyone accepts the myth that human beings are not trustworthy enough, moral enough, not wise enough to exist in peace without government to keep them in line. Even many who agree that there would be no rulers in an ideal society often opine that human beings are not ready for such society. Such sentiments are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what authority is and what it adds to society. The idea of government as a necessary evil, as Patrick Henry described it, implies that the existence of a government imposes restraints upon the violent, aggressive nature of human beings, when in reality it does the exact opposite. The belief in authority legitimizes and legalizes aggression. Regardless of how foolish or wise human beings are, or how malicious or virtuous they might be, to say that human beings are not ready for a stateless society or cannot be trusted to exist without having an authority that they bow to is to say that peaceful civilization can only exist if there's a huge, powerful machine that introduces an enormous amount of immoral violence into society. Of course, statists do not recognize this violence as immoral because to them, it is not mere mortals committing the violence, but representatives of the deity known as government, and deities have the right to do things mortals do not. When described in accurate, literal terms, this necessarily universally held belief that it is necessary to introduce immoral violence in society in order to prevent people from committing immoral violence is exposed as the patently absurd myth that it is. But everyone who believes in the myth of government has to believe exactly that. They do not believe it as a result of rational thought and logic. They accept it as an article of faith because it is part of the unquestionable doctrine of the Church of Government.